Hello and welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed, the monthly show that explores the ins and outs of theater operations, management, facilities, and design. I'm your host, Raymond Kent. In each episode, we will be focusing on management, operations, design, trends, and best practices in the performing arts. I hope to bring you both insights from my 4 decades in the industry, as well as engaging conversations with theater professionals about the challenges and rewards of their work. We'll also cover a wide range of topics from budgeting and scheduling to marketing and audience development, theater technology, and many other related topics. Whether you're a theater maker yourself or just interested in the industry, I hope you'll find this podcast informative and inspiring. So sit back, relax, or lean in, and let's dive into the world of theater. Hello, I'm here with David Glowacki, who is the Chief Production Officer for the Embassy Theater in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He has professional experience as an administrator, a manager, a designer, technician, and performer, and has worked in presenting, producing, touring, and educational environments. He's a longtime member of the United States Institute for Theater Technology and serving as their Safety and Health Commissioner from 2011 to 2017. And he's currently the USITT representative to OSHA Alliance Program and serving the USITT Ohio Valley section as their safety training coordinator. Dave regularly presents sessions at USITT national and regional events and is an authorized OSHA outreach trainer. Whenever he can, Dave enjoys spending time with his family, and he's an avid cycler and is dedicated to perfecting his skills as a coffee and bourbon snob. We are going to have a bourbon tasting, my friend, because I am definitely into bourbon and scotch. So welcome, David. I appreciate you taking the time here on Theater Operations Unleashed to have a little chat with us about your perspective of all this experience that you've had, but going into working at the Embassy, which is a historic venue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is a brand new position that they've had.
Correct.
So they brought you in specifically for this. Can you talk a little bit more about how this new role for the Embassy is impacting the operations of the organization, challenges, opportunities, successes that you found? You've been there about 9 months now. Is that it?
I'm 3/4 of the way on my first circle around the sun.
That's great.
So as I have been learning things, and my learning curve has been like trying to sip out of a fire hydrant. So the Embassy, first a historic theater. It opened in 1928 as the M. Boyd Theater, and then changed hands in the early 50s and got renamed as the Embassy Theater. We are a 2,500 seat roughly theater, single space, single theater space. We have other spaces that we use. And for a very long time, while it was originally opened as a vaudeville and film house, and in the area of silent films, so we have a grand page organ that's part of the building, and I specifically use that expression because this was slated to be demolished in the early 70s. And literally, they knocked down a building across the street from us and were turning the crane, and a group of folks were able to get a stay and preserve it.
Wow. It's a familiar story for a lot of historic venues, right?
Yeah. Well, the original intent was to save the grand page organ, but as they started looking into how to do that, they realized that it was so integrated into the building that the only way to save the organ was to save the whole building.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you spent time in Cleveland, and Playhouse Square, saving those theaters. Fortunately, those were saved, but so many more down Euclid Avenue never were. So it's interesting back history. I never knew that about the Embassy.
I'm still learning it as I go, making sure it's not made up, because it's a great story. So for the majority of its life, the Embassy was a rental house, and promoters would pay to rent the space and use the space, and there was pretty small staff here And then about 15 years ago or so, new president and CEO was hired, and gradually the board evolved and turned the mission of the theater to become more of a presenting and co-presenting space than strictly a rental house. And so in order to support that new direction, Kelly Updike, who's our president and CEO, started putting together a senior team and creating positions to better guide all of the aspects of operation that needed to be managed, that she had been covering a lot of herself for many years. So one of the pieces was a chief production officer. And as I like to say, a big part of my job is trying to figure out how to drag this almost 100-year-old theater kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Right.
Because there were a lot of, well, our business has evolved a lot in the last 100 years, and the building has been lagging a little bit behind.
Yep. Not using candles anymore, right? Yeah.
Not using candles, no. But the last major renovation was in 1995, 96, and they actually blew out, like many other theaters, including the Allen Theater that you mentioned at Playhouse Square. They blew out the back wall and added stage and added gridiron, and trying to create an environment that could handle the bigger shows that we're now touring. So I'm picking up and carrying on where that is, working on updating audio and lighting and projection and infrastructure, and making sure that what we have that doesn't need to be upgraded is still in working order and has getting proper inspections and things like that.
So, with it being a historic theater, right? As you mentioned, so many historic venues around this country, there's many physical challenges, that impact daily operations and management of a venue like this, right? As you mentioned, load-in, performer support, aging technology, infrastructure, and so on. How do you think it affects or impacts how you operate this building? From a production standpoint, audience, standpoint, is there a different methodology that you have to apply to it, a different way of thinking compared to, say, if this were a brand new, theater, right? Like you had a brand new theater when you were at Kent State Tuscarawas, right?
That's right.
Compared to 100-year-old venue.
Well, I guess the biggest thing is that, I walked into this space with 95 years of history. And, when I was hired for the position with Kent State, it was still under construction. There was still some opportunity to make some changes and tweak some things that I recognized needed to be done to facilitate operation once we open. Here I'm I'm really working with the hand I'm dealt. The building envelope is what it is. The biggest challenge for bringing in touring shows right now is that we don't even own the parking lot behind our building. So when we have tours coming in, we have to negotiate to block off parking spaces for buses and trucks, and we have to if it's more than two trucks or two buses or one truck and one bus or any combination, then we're also looking at street parking after they unload. So it's the logistics problem of moving those pieces around. It's also a street level dump. I don't have a real loading dock. My stage is actually 40 inches below street level. So not only is it a street dump and we're having to rent forklifts, but then we're also using a lift to lower things down to our stage level.
Right. Compared to University of St. Francis, which was 40 inches above grade. right? Kind of an
54 actually.
54, right?
Yeah,
54,
so it was above normal truck height, which a whole different set of challenges.
right.
Um,
With a freight elevator that was kind of wonky and halfway up, and and everything else. So
yeah, yeah. Luckily, I avoided any big shows coming in and out of that place. But this one, there's the history. We are an IATSE. We work with our local IATSE a lot, and this is how it's always been here. Even before they did the expansion of the stage, they were dealing with the street level truck unload and so forth. So, um, that institutional knowledge uh, was very well set by the time I got here.
mhm.
But you talk about other things like, seat width and aisle width and accessibility areas. There is, this was built 50, 60 years before the ADA became a thing.
Sure, yeah.
So, getting performers on and off the stage who might have mobility issues is a real challenge. Much less, if there happen to be touring crew that have challenges that we have to try and accommodate so they can do their jobs with the
Right.
shows that they're bringing.
And I'm sure, with your immense amount of knowledge and background history with safety and OSHA and everything, you walk into spaces like this and, just kind of want to shake your head sometimes, turn around and walk right back out. you know,
I'm a
uh,
sucker for a challenge.
right, right. But, you and I have been through a couple of those challenges, in projects before, right?
Right.
Um, your previous place of employment certainly had a number of those challenges, and I'm sure the embassy does as well. So, what do you do knowing that this is you're given the hand you're dealt, to use your phrase, but you still have to accommodate, or work to accommodate. How do you manage that?
Well, as I mentioned, there's an awful lot of institutional knowledge that exists, for good or for bad. I mean, one of the most dangerous phrases in our language is, "This is how we've always done it."
Sure.
So, the first span of time, I spent a lot of time just watching how they've always done it, and then starting to suggest changes and figure out how we can improve things. Um, I have survived this long on the production side of this business by learning to look further and further ahead and anticipate things so that you can face them and handle them before they become problems.
Right.
So, when we have a tour coming in that's, I can tell from the rider or something that there's going to be challenges, I reach out sooner rather than later and try to explain them. And a very wise mentor once told me that nobody has a monopoly on truth. And that, I rely on that all the time, because oftentimes the tours have come into other historic theaters with similar issues, and they said, "Oh, well, at the theater in St. Louis, this is how we managed to get around and make that work."
Right.
And sometimes it's the perfect solution, sometimes it needs tweaking, other times it's not going to work, but it gets me thinking down a different path than I otherwise would have. And not being necessarily fixated on the way things have always been done, certainly gives me an advantage to solving problems, because I'm not stuck with a limited number of options or a limited viewpoint to consider things.
Well, that's good. As we know, the pandemic uh, really kind of wreaked havoc on our industry,
Mm-hmm.
and the nature of the business is changing, right?
Yeah.
So the way we've always done it doesn't always hold water. I mean, look at 10 out of 12s now, right?
Right.
A big pushback on working 10 out of 12s, and was teaching my class this past Thursday on safety and health in working in this business. That was the whole lecture, was Thursday's class on that. And talking about, being overworked and tired and all of those other things and how that can cause injury and everything. But now you lay on top of it this different thinking around how we produce shows and what those um, things are that need to change for better work-life balance, better safety, things like that. Talk to me a bit about what are you doing to identify those types of things other than keeping up with industry news, and then working, say, with IATSE or your board or Kelly and the rest of the management team or other community partners to help guide them in that direction towards, we're trying to evolve this industry to be better, more accommodating, right? And the industry is evolving and keeping them up to speed.
Right. Well, and that's, wow. That was like 72 and a half questions in one sentence. That was well done, my friend. So what how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So the first bite, I have noticed with a lot of, following up on coming out of pandemic and how there've been changes, as you well know, an awful lot of people, not necessarily by choice, but left our industry because of the pandemic, and they pivoted and they found other careers. And then as things started coming back, some of them came back to production and live entertainment, and some of them realized that they were enjoying the different life that they had figured out to create. So there's some real interesting blends happening where I've had some shows in the 9 months here where I've had folks come through that I had had come through the venue at Kent State in 2014 or 2015 with different shows. So seasoned people who have that background in touring, and have some of that "this is how we've always done it" mentality. And then coming out of the pandemic, because of shortages of personnel, a lot of tours, they got whoever they could to staff a tour. So you've got folks with, we advanced a show earlier today where it was the first tour for the head carpenter. And we are going to be their fourth stop. So I'm anticipating, I'm going to have to do a lot of teaching and help this guy really relook at some things about his show that, to make it more adaptable to other spaces that he's going to encounter. So really, it's going to be a while, I think, before this all kind of settles down into some sort of a predictable rhythm. And then you throw in the idea of no more 10 of 12s and things like that, which I think is a really good outcome of the pandemic. And that kind of grew out of the it had been rumbling for a while under the surface. The pandemic finally gave us the time to organize and vocalize it.
Sure. Yeah. Among a lot of other things like EPI and things like that, right?
Well, that and the Me Too and all of the things. So I think the constant for quite a while in our industry is going to continue to be change as these things all sort of figure out the right rhythm and the right ebb and flow. And but so now the next bite is coming from my background into a place where they didn't have there was usually a house TD, wildly varying levels of experience and lack of broad focus. Somebody who was really strong on lighting but wasn't on audio and rigging, and so the lighting system got attention and got updated, but rigging and audio, nothing happened. And then the next person may have been an audio person, so that got caught up, but the lighting system suffered then. So
Sure.
there's some unevenness in the evolution of the systems here. And the same thing with safety. So I've been doing a lot of gentle education, because they're what's the best way to say this? Nobody has really come in and paid that much attention to safety, because for so many years there has not been a serious accident here.
Right.
So it got, consideration of that got pushed to the back burner. And, when I'm start talking about safety and I'm getting some pushback that, well, no, why do we have to spend money on this or on fall protection? Why do we have to start wearing hard hats? Why do we, and I can't just wave my arms and say, well, it's because it's an OSHA regulation and we're going to get fined if we don't. I have to do some
Not to
education.
mention that I'm sure if they're going to go work at the convention center, they're going to have to wear hard hats. Right?
Yeah, that's true. And so there's some of that weird, this is how we've always done it, that I'm trying to educate people out of. And just yelling and screaming doesn't work there.
You need a sharper, pointier stick. But I think you come out of education, right? You've had a lot of experience in education. Do you lean on that experience to accomplish a lot of these things?
All the time, every day. I'm doing everything I ever learned how to do, teaching high school and college students, to teach my peers now and to teach other folks about why this stuff is important. And I guess I finally stumbled upon something that seems to get people at least thinking honestly about the situation. And that's the fact that, you guys, yes, there has been well, let me rephrase that. You're absolutely right. There have not been serious accidents in the past, and you have every right to be proud of that. However, statistically, you are way past due for
Sure.
something. And the longer it goes, my fear is the bigger it's going to be.
Yeah.
There's this complacency.
Yeah. Mount Fort Wayne is going to erupt any minute.
And I hope it's not in my building. I hope it's,
Right.
one of the other theaters.
So real quick, talk to me about the talent pool, right? I mean, Fort Wayne is the second largest city within the state of Indiana.
Correct.
There are a number of theaters around town, Honeywell Center, Arts United Center, things like that. But I know you and I and others, folks over at the Clyde, folks from the AUC, have talked about the training, not just of the professionals, but of younger generations to create that labor pool.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that stand, and how do you see that contributing to the improvement of maybe your efforts at the embassy, or just in general within Fort Wayne or elsewhere? Right? It's an important thing.
It is an important thing. It's and there's a small group of us now that really understand and recognize the need for this kind of change. I think the first step in that is that, we're working to develop a set of common standards that all of these venues are going to hold anyone coming into the space to work. We're going to hold them to these standards. The bottom line is, what does OSHA say? What does fire marshal say? What do, any of the various authorities having jurisdiction, because they're the ones Well, they're the people who are going to back us up when we tell people we have to follow these rules. They're also the people that are going to write citations if we egregiously don't follow these rules. So they're willing to be our friends and help us as long as we're making forward progress and a genuine effort to evolve things to where they need to be. There is a sad lack of formal education programs on technical theater in this area.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, well, in Fort Wayne, there's really just one university that has any type of technical theater production, and that's mostly focused on design and technical direction. Um, so, um, getting and I've been a little busy trying to get my own house in order. Haven't had the chance yet to connect with the folks there and tour their space and have a conversation about their views on safety training and how they incorporate safety training into the curriculum there. I would love to get them involved with this movement and get them supporting this so that the formal training is happening there, and then we can be working. I've been working with our local IATSE to reach out to their training trust with the international and really start to take advantage of the trainings and so forth that are available through their own organization, and getting people up to speed on other things. And then as I still haven't figured out, and I haven't heard any fabulous ideas from anybody else around the table yet about the community theater level. Sure. Where you've got so many volunteers and you've got it's a constantly changing group of people. How do we get and they may or well, none of them have their own space. They're all kind of transient groups working in different theaters around town, and how do we get them to buy into this movement that we're trying to achieve?
Right, and not have waiting for Guffman, right?
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit at the start about co-productions, not being more than just a rental house. Talk to me a bit about that, and how do you have to pivot, maybe the management operations of the space around that compared to just a bus and truck that's going to show up at your door?
Well, the co-pros that we're doing, we're still primarily dealing with presenting and touring shows coming through. It's just a question of equal, a shared investment in bringing the show and a split return on profits from the show.
Gotcha.
So on the production, from the production point of view, nothing changes. It's still interfacing with touring shows, and working together to execute shows and do it safely. And the money, the co-pro idea is much more on the front office side.
Do you see the embassy ever actually, swinging hammers and building their own shows, building their own scenery, and doing a co-production that way?
I don't. We don't have any kind of shop facilities or anything like that, and no room to put them, no room to add them. But also we are trying to. We've been approached by local groups because, as you're well aware, the Arts United Center is about to go under a major renovation and be closed for more than a year.
I know a little bit about that place.
Just a little bit. So the resident companies there are trying to find temporary new homes for, the next 2-3 seasons. And several have reached out to us, but, that's a more traditional producing model where they take 3 to 4 weeks to build a set on stage, and 3 to 4 weeks to rehearse on it, and then 3 to 4 weekends of performances, and then they take it down and do it again. And financially, that just doesn't work for the embassy.
Sure.
And it can't, to give up a 3 to 4 week block of time. And none of these groups can afford to pay what we would need to make in rental income
Right. Yeah.
to balance it out. So
Yeah. How many nights a year are you up?
we're on the above 200. I know that. I heard because we've talked to primarily focused around the theater, but we have a ballroom where we have a lot of wedding receptions and proms and things, and we have so the embassy is a theater, like I said, a 2,500 seat theater that was built wrapped on two sides with a hotel.
Yeah.
So the hotel, we have the theater lobby, we have the hotel lobby, we have a 2-story ballroom up on the 6th and 7th floors. And we have a rooftop patio that we can open up. So as far as space activations go, last number I heard was something like we had over 500 events over the course of our 22-23 fiscal year.
Wow, that's a lot of hopping around.
That's a lot of hopping around.
But yeah, 2,500 seats. I mean, that's a huge space, huge amount of seats. These are the outside groups that are coming in, the local ones in particular. Whether it's the orchestra or the ballet or civic theater or the youth theater or whatever, whoever's coming to your place, they're probably not going to be coming anywhere near close to filling that house. Is that a challenge?
Well, we've my understanding, I don't know this for gospel because I've been so busy focused on my own staying in my own lane and getting that improved that I'm not really paying attention. But I understand that we have special rates for other nonprofit organizations and so forth. So when we partner with, for instance, there's the Fort Wayne Dance Collective.
Sure.
We're partnering with them this coming spring to bring in the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. So hopefully that's enough of a draw to, make that a viable endeavor. Last year, not long after I started, we brought in Syncopated Ladies, which was a co-pro with the Dance Collective again, and that did really well, partly because part of the contract is to do master classes with the touring performers coming in. There's always this educational component, and then there's the performance component. So creatively coming up with programming like that is making it possible for some of these other groups to get their time in the big house.
That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me, let's shift gears a bit. Talk to me about your background and what do you think influenced you the most to help you do what you do today, right? As you and I were talking about before we hit the record button, building the plane as you fly it, which often happens. And I've talked about this with a few other folks that I've had the pleasure of talking with for this particular podcast as well. What were those airplane parts that you had that allowed you to build this airplane here?
Holy cow. Well, you and I have talked about this. The two words I would never, ever use to describe my career path are linear and predictable. I was supposed to be a recording engineer. That's what I went to college for.
Right.
The vision in the, 1988 was, by this point in my life, I'd own my own studio. I'd have a couple Grammys on the shelf behind my desk, and I'd be hanging out with artists making good music.
Right.
Fell in love with the theater major, and that all changed.
Yeah.
So I guess the things that have either kept me out of trouble or kept me in trouble, depending on the perspective. I don't give up. I am ridiculously confident that I can figure out anything. And I keep around me a large group of friends, of which you're a part, who I think are much smarter than I am, but are willing to share that knowledge with me and help me get out of problems when I get into them.
That's why I have you on speed dial. I need to go like promotion. I have to call Dave, right? I was
Yeah,
struggling my inner Dave on yesterday in class. Like, I was actually I legitimately brought you up in class about OSHA training and if they want to know more and stuff like that. But yeah, uh,
well, you know, and that's, that led to, that it was I was still in Cleveland, and I started at a private high school there as their staff tech director and designer. And I first started getting involved with USITT because this was a private school, and half of the parents were lawyers and the other half were doctors that could afford much better lawyers than the school was going to provide for me if one of their kids got hurt working on the stage.
sure.
Um, so I went to USITT and started learning about how to do theater more safely. And after a couple of years there, put up my hand and said, well, this came up in a session, a safety session, and I don't think that's right. I think there's a better, safer way to do it. And somebody looked at me and said, great, how would you like to do a session on that next year?
Yep.
Yep.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And that went well. And so I got invited to do another and another, and that kept growing and evolving. And there was a recognized need in our industry for people to get, well, by enough USITT members had issues with, specifically with OSHA, about safety in their spaces and in their venues, that USITT recognized a need to learn more about OSHA. And they turned to the Safety and Health Commission, and I was the young one who hadn't said no yet. So
Right.
I started learning more, and USITT supported my becoming an OSHA outreach trainer. And as I learned more, and as USITT traveled around the country, I was making connections with the local OSHA compliance officers and consultation folks around the country. And as people around the country started, would have other encounters, they might call USITT, and USITT would forward them to me, and I could, oh, you're in St. Louis, great, I have a relationship with so and so at the OSHA consultation office. Why don't I put the two of you together, and I'll act as translator, and we'll see if we can get your problem solved.
Right.
And that's a service that I'm happy to do, because I'm here in large part because of what I learned through USITT. And so now it's, I've reached a point in my life where I'm very happy to give back.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah, USITT, United States Institute of Theater Technology. It's a great organization. I've been a member since 1988, and I've learned, even though I've gone to fancy colleges and have fancy degrees and everything else in theater, I've learned so much more out of that organization, and from the collaboration with people in the industry such as yourself and others, because knowledge sharing is such a great thing. Um, we both have a lot of on the job training, and we've been through a lot of hard knocks, right? And I think you and I both have a mission to try to teach the next generation to not have to suffer that.
yeah.
We're both parents, we both have kids, and we don't want to see them get hurt. So we try to teach them not to touch the hot stove and things like that. What do you wish, if you could have gone back, what do you wish you had more information on earlier in your career that would have been helpful for you today in what you're doing?
All of it.
All of it,
I mean,
right?
I mean, really, like you talk about, flying, building the plane as you're flying it. I wish somebody had at least given me a drawing that let me figure out that it was a plane I was trying to put together while I was flying. I think I'm gonna turn the question a little bit. I One of the things I wish that I had pushed harder for when I was, you know, an instructor at the different universities where I was, and I recognized, theater. Let's talk about scenic construction for just as an example. Yeah, we call the people who build our sets carpenters, um, but they're, and they're working with, wood and other materials like that, but they're not working to build a house that's going to last 50, 60, 100 years. They're building something that's going to last, weeks, unless it's a touring set, and then it's,
Right.
then it might be months. But so in theater, we take for granted that there are a lot of shortcuts in how we build things because of budgets, because of time, because of all the constraints. And and the problem with a lot of this is that the instructors went through programs to learn how to do things the theater way, and don't have that background in how things really need to get built to be structural and strong. So the shortcuts are not informed, deliberate, intentional shortcuts. They learn shortcuts from their instructor, who may have learned them from someone else. I put myself through undergrad working for a couple of different contractors in the summers and did that kind of work. And, seeing some of the shortcuts that became standardized in our industry, that was one thing. And it took me a minute to learn and appreciate and accept some of these shortcuts. But then when I see students taking what is already a shortcut method from their instructor and further choosing to shortcut on that, and not having the background to make it intentional and make it safe still. I wish I had jumped up and down and waved my arms louder, because at the time, I said, I think we should require students to spend at least one summer actually working in real construction and learn how stuff's really built. And that got shot down in a hurry.
You mean that 1x2 pine is not structural?
Yeah, gaff tape is a fantastic material, but
Oh yeah, I worked in a venue where when I was very young in this industry, where the then technical director was flying things over actors' heads with, 1/4-inch tie line and 1-inch marine shivs that he bought at the local hardware store.
oh, sure.
And had been doing that for 30 years. And just like
Well,
the it never had an accident. So to him, that was perfectly safe.
yeah, one of the first times I served as a TD, it was I was actually contracted to strike a set and then build the next set in this theater. And the set, I don't remember what the show was, but it had two, it might very well have been West Side Story. Attached to the proscenium, left and right, were two different stairways with fire escape kind of balconies. And on one side, I took out first of all, there were nuts and bolts, there were carriage bolts, there were nails, there were screws, there were staples. Every piece of hardware you could think of, and I took them all out, and this thing still would not come down.
Wow.
And I went over to the other side of stage, and I took out 2 screws and ran for my life because the whole thing did come down.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Think of all the high schools out there who are doing Peter Pan and trying to fly somebody,
Yeah, with some very well-meaning dads who
Right.
understand a 2-to-1 ratio on a shiv, but that's
Right.
about the extent of it.
Yeah. Well, so much of what you do, you've been in leadership for a while, requires business acumen. I've always been a big proponent. If I had to go back and identify the one thing I wish I had more training in, was the business of show business.
Oh, yeah.
Because so many, we work the gig economy a lot of times. And, simple things like filing taxes or doing payroll or scheduling or things like that, budgeting, you know, I kind of learned on the fly. And it wasn't until grad school where I actually went next door to the School of Management and said, "Hey, can I take a couple classes?" And I'm so glad I did. Right.
Sure.
But man, was that eye opening to me because I'm mad. Sure, I can build you a 4x8 flat blindfolded, but trying to budget something, forget
Yeah.
it.
Cost that out.
you know, what about you? I mean, do you think that would be benefit people in this industry more?
Totally. And I think, even a couple of basic entrepreneurship classes, because, as you mentioned, a lot of us are, very much in the gig mindset, and we're jumping from place to place, and knowing, um, how to value your skills and accurately determine what your costs are. So how much you have to make for a gig so that you can intentionally negotiate for what you need, as opposed to, you know accepting this show for this much money, and not necessarily figuring out, well, for the time commitment I'm only making X number of dollars, whereas this other
Right.
show, same number of dollars but less time, so I'm actually making more, which frees up more time to make even more. um a lot of that, yes, having that kind of intentionality to how we're selling ourselves and our services,
Yeah,
because it's all service.
right. Doing it for the exposure doesn't pay the bills, right?
Not a bit. Not a
Uh,
bit.
yeah, I mean, it's really, to me, I think it's a shortfall that we have here in the industry. And even if you're not in management, I think it's still good to have a foundation in it, just so you understand, we're all working for the common good, and to make, every precious dollar within a nonprofit, maximize it and help make that organization successful. To your point, the we've always done it that way. It might not be in the organization's best interest to go to Home Depot to buy a pallet of plywood because it's 5 miles up the road,
Right.
instead of actually putting it out to bid, and maybe the lumber yard that's 15 miles down the road is $10 a sheet cheaper, but they
And they
deliver.
offer free delivery.
Yeah, and they'll be happy to deliver you 200 sheets of plywood, right?
Hmm.
But I think it's well, it's just right up the street, and sometimes convenience gets in the way of that economic model that really helps organizations survive. And where I'm coming from that is, again, to go back to the pandemic and the economic challenges that we saw so many venues have, where prior to the pandemic they didn't really consider that. And then the pandemic hit, and they realized how quickly they ran out of money, or and the cost of materials has gone through the roof now.
Hmm.
They're starting to reopen. What was $25 for a sheet of plywood is now 50, $60. And you used to be able to buy a sheet of Luan for $10, and now it's $23 at Home Depot. And you're like, oh my God,
Right.
so your costs have doubled. Even on the technology side, look at the cost of lighting fixtures or sound equipment or things like that has gone through the roof.
Well,
Uh,
let's talk about labor.
and labor too. People want to be paid more, and they should.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, um, I remember seeing an advertisement a few years back prior to the pandemic for an arts organization that was looking for a technical director in an inner city theater, paying, looking for somebody for a 60-hour a week minimum, paying 16,000 a year. And I think you can go to McDonald's, work 40 hours a week, and make more money. So it's harsh. It's really harsh. And I get it. There's a lot of arts organizations that say we can't afford that. So there's lot of talk about, process sharing, combined scene shops, combined costume shops, where everybody contributes to the materials, everybody contributes to the labor, and there's output that way. Just like you're going to share box office or share marketing, and things like that as a way to save dollars, doing smaller shows with fewer actors, there's also a rethinking about, space in general. right? Like I said, you have a 2,500 seat house. That's huge. Uh, our houses, do you see houses like that in the future? You're in a 100-year-old venue. You have what you have, but as things start to get renovated, and I think about projects that we've done at Playhouse Square, where we've taken the Allen Theater and the Hanna Theater from 1,800, 1,200 seats down to 550.
Right.
Because the economic model drives that, and that's what those organizations can support. Right.
Right.
What are your thoughts on things like that?
Well, I mean, I think every town is still going to need the one big house, where they can bring in, because you talk about the economics and, bringing in, a performer to do one show of 2,500 people versus doing the cost of two shows for 1,250 people each. Sometimes it does make more sense, one and done and they move on.
Right.
But I think that, there is absolutely something to, putting a show in the right size venue. The space that I opened for Kent State University was, we were just shy of 1,200. And, there were shows we desperately wished we could have brought in and that our audience demanded, and we know that they would have done really well, but they were just too big. And then there were other shows that, even a venue less than half the size of the one I'm in now, it looked like a really small audience. So, but there was nowhere else around that they could go. That was, the thing with, the last venue I had, the reason I moved to Fort Wayne in the first place, that venue has 1,900 seats, and in the talk of renovation and updating and creating the ADA considerations that need to be done, we were thinking about trimming that down to 1,500-1,600,
right.
Which would have put it really nicely in between, the Embassy where I am now with 2,500 and Arts United, which is 690, 700. So it would have put it right in the middle of those and given another viable option for people to consider as they're bringing a show to town.
Yeah.
So maybe the answer is, just filling in that spectrum with some intelligently deliberate sizings so that no town has to turn any show down. And by town, I'm assuming that they have the population to support. That was one of the other things. I mean, Fort Wayne is a whole lot bigger than Kent, Ohio, or Dover, Ohio, which is actually where I was. So, we do have those shows where, we can sell out, 2 nights, 5,000 people, and still have people wanting more.
Right.
So it takes some intelligence to consider all that and figure it out. And that was actually one of your previous guests. I had the pleasure of working with Christina Cruz, and she taught me an awful lot about that kind of how to look at that issue.
Yeah, we had a great conversation in our last episode, our inaugural episode, about that. And really looking at the community connection as the driver. Because of course one of the big challenges that we have today that did not exist 100 years ago was, people have a lot more choices in what they spend their entertainment dollars on. Right. Legit theater is struggling still. I mean, there's a week goes by that we're not seeing another article come out about this major theater reducing its season, or taking a break this season, or literally shutting their doors down for good.
Yeah.
But live music is doing well. Popular music, live music is selling out. People are still going to concerts, but with so many other options, the movie industry is struggling still. Blockbuster, sure, people will go see the Barbie movie because it's a huge blockbuster. But or if there was a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie, if that were to ever come out or whatever, people will go see that because they want that big giant cinematic experience. But I can buy a 110-inch, 4K OLED television, slap it on my wall, put really nice sound system in for a whole heck of a lot less money than going to see a couple movies, right?
Sure.
And I can start it when I want. I can stop it. I can cook my own food, use my own bathroom. Don't have to pay for parking or any of that other stuff. So there's been a shift in consumption that I think the industry is still grappling with, and that's kind of the driver behind my question about size and types of venues and stuff. Is a 2,500 seat venue still viable? And if things shift in how we make theater and what kinds of shows we're producing, what does that look like for venues like yours?
I gotta say that I'm sorry, but that's a question for somebody smarter than me.
That's okay.
I think, you made a good point, or a good distinction that, music and concerts is the strongest aspect of the industry right now. And I think that has a lot to do with the portability of it.
Sure.
And also, the audience that it's appealing to. Theater has, it's well, opera, you think of opera and immediately you have a mental image of the typical opera patron or symphony, or, you say theater. And unless you're talking about, some of the current Broadway that's, like Mean Girls or Beetlejuice or things like that. I mean, you're thinking of an older demographic. And music tends to blur those lines more. But it also tends to, you could put out more tours that apply to that appeal to different segments of the population easier and more economically than you can put out a Broadway show.
Right. I just saw Six.
I'm
Um,
jealous.
don't be. I, uh, I didn't like it. I I was expecting a musical. What I got was a rock concert, and I wasn't expecting it. Right. I didn't find there to be much. I know there's probably going to get all kinds of hate mail and things like that now, right? Um, but I felt like I was watching a Taylor Swift concert or Sia or or pick a Beyonce or whatever. Which if I had come there expecting it, I probably would have had a different attitude. But I'm old school. I got enough gray hair in my head. When I think musical, I'm thinking West Side Story. I'm thinking things like that. Like I still have not even seen Hamilton because it does. I have no interest in going to see Hamilton.
Okay.
I've seen Wicked a couple times now, and it's kind of kitschy, but I think that uh, to me, there's so many Broadway-ish kind of shows that are out there that are really gearing themselves towards, you know, buy the album and go to the merch store instead of driving stories through music, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm just not a fan of that, and so I have a harder time. I'd rather go see. I just saw Thurgood at Cleveland Playhouse last week. Amazing show,
Oh, cool.
and that's the kind of show that really gets me excited to go see.
Hmm.
Um, great story, great performer, great set, great, so many great things about it. Um, that I got lost in the play where when I went to go see Six, I was more interested in, oh, what kind of light fixture is that? Oh, that microphone's on. I start to think more about the technical elements of it and like, because I lost interest in the show.
The
But
story didn't grab
it was
you.
packed. It was absolutely packed in the theater, right? Because I think there was an expectation of the younger audience that was there about
Hmm.
that type of entertainment, like it's a music rock concert, like they're going to go see, uh, Taylor Swift. It's just not going to be sold through Ticketmaster and have it crash in 2 minutes or whatever. But
Well, what you bring up is what I experienced when I took my wife and I took my parents to see Rent when it first went to Playhouse Square.
yeah,
And my dad came out at intermission. He's like, "What the heck was that?" because, he was used to, the musicals of the 50s and the 60s where
Oh,
there's dialogue and acting, and then
South
they break into a
Pacific
song.
and
Yeah.
Hello Dolly in 1776. Yeah, all of that, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, we've seen, opera companies and ballet companies and orchestras, and, you mentioned theaters closing their doors because, um, and I hesitate to use the phrase because I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's sort of, when I say it, you'll understand exactly what I mean. They're finding that they're no longer relevant to the people who want to spend money on entertainment. So, Six was an aggressive way to reimagine a Broadway tour or a Broadway show. But I think, a lot of the organizations that have survived, have, I spent a couple of years living in Louisville, and the Louisville Orchestra is doing great because they have a young artistic director who's their principal conductor, who is going to extraordinary efforts to make orchestra music appealing to I don't even know what generation it is. It's the 40 and between 25 and 45 crowd.
Millennials, yeah.
Millennials. And he's doing some really creative, really interesting programs, bringing in, non-traditional guest artists to perform with them. And where, an established orchestra might have 3 pieces on a program that are out of the traditional catalog, and then they'll add a 20th century composer to help open people's ears to it. This guy's bringing in 3 non-traditional things and then adding a Mozart or a Beethoven to satisfy the older folks who still appreciate that kind of music.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, it's definitely a changing landscape. I want to start to wrap things up here. Kind of almost last question. What advice would you give to other folks in your shoes, other operators or people trying to do what you do?
If anywhere in your brain, the words "this is how we've always done it" are lurking, find them and flush them out. It's the people that are willing to, as we learned during the pandemic, the people that are willing to pivot and embrace new ways of doing things and rethink old models, they're the ones that are surviving and thriving.
Great. And last and final question: favorite bourbon?
Favorite bourbon that I can afford or that I can't afford?
It doesn't matter. Favorite bourbon.
All right. I spent 2 hours enjoying a $65 pour of Pappy. When USITT was in Louisville, I splurged. And that was partly, it was the environment. But right now, my favorite on my shelf at home is called Blade and Bow.
I do like that. That's a very good one. I'm partial to Blanton's. It's hard to find.
Yeah, Blanton's has become the accessible Pappies, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm partial to rye.
Yeah. See, I'm a Scotch drinker, but if I have to have a bourbon, a nice Avalor, or Glenfiddich, 18 year or something, or
you just
single cast.
Shove that peat up your nose, huh?
That's right. All right, my friend. Hey, it has been a great time talking to you, and I really appreciate all your time and words of wisdom here to our listeners. So with that, we will see you all next month for Theater Operations Unleashed.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time today to listening to Theater Operations Unleashed. We hope to see you next month.